As you pursue your unique growth strategies, I think this concept of looking beyond tradition has a broader application for everyone in this room. I mean, each of us understands that we have to innovate and embrace change. In fact, it's the underlying reason that we're all here today, isn't it? So how do we, in a broader sense, develop those plans that will drive our businesses forward? By show of hands, did anyone here attend last year's conference in San Antonio? Okay, great. Well, if you did, you remember a guy named Jason Dorsey, the millennial expert who spoke on generational trends? Well, if you were there, and we all know that would be a silly question then, because Jason is unforgettable. And if you weren't able to join us last year, the best way to sum up Jason's presentation, in the words of millennials, would be #nailed it. I mean, he was awesome, right? In fact, everyone was so blown away by Jason's research and his insight that we wanted to keep the conversation going. Millennials are such a significant topic of conversation these days. Their habits, how to engage them, how to bank them, and we know that understanding them is key for any business going forward. And actually, after last year's conference, we got together with Jason and his team to partner on a research study that examined millennials' banking practices and habits. Now, there is an abundance of research available on millennials, but what Jason's team and CSI wanted to uncover, which is largely what was missing, is just what do millennials have to say specifically about banking? So working together, we conducted a national study of more than 1,000 US consumers to really get their views on banking and their personal banking preferences. And from that research, we examined it from a millennial's perspective, and we uncovered some very insightful and helpful information on this elusive generation. Before we start examining the study, I guess let's establish some context around who millennials really are. And many of us may think of them as this 20-something college graduates living with their parents, but that's not really accurate anymore. Millennials were born between 1977 and 1995. And I wonder how many millennials we have with us today. How about a quick show of hands if you're a millennial? These lights, I can see 3 hands. There's got to be more than that out there. Okay, there's 4. Okay, people in this generation are now approaching their 40s, so you can tell that by looking at the table in case someone's lying. But millennials are living what's called a delayed adulthood in some ways. They're getting married, having children, and making significant purchases later in life. However, they are the most diverse and highly educated generation ever. And this year, they will spend more than any other generation. And that fact alone is what brings us to the crux of our study. If we can better understand this generation as they start having families and making major purchases, then we can start building meaningful relationships with them. And we hope that's exactly how we can use the research going forward. Now, this study is absolutely packed with data, and we could go on all day discussing it, but there's really 2 key pieces of research that I'd like to focus on this morning. And one is millennials' views on working in our industry, and the other is how millennials want us to engage with them. So first off, how many here have millennials working in your organization? You know, at CSI, we found that, somewhat to our surprise, that 46% of our employee population are millennials. Yes, almost half, or 1 in 2 employees are between the ages of 22 and 40. And as a technology company, obviously, you know, we love that. But I question sometimes whether people are tracking that, because what motivates and drives these employees aren't the same principles and perks that drive many of us. And we have to recognize that. And we found in our study that when we question millennials on their views on banking, we found this: 91% believe that banking is a respectable career, but only 1/3 would be likely or very likely to accept a job in the industry. So they admire the profession, but it doesn't appeal to them personally. Now, that's a problem on many fronts, isn't it? But for the purpose of today's discussion, how are we going to recruit the next generation of bankers? When asked what would most likely help them accept a job at a bank or credit union besides the salary, you know what they said? Anybody want to take a guess? Well, the top two recruitment tools in the arsenal are benefits and paid time off. 42% and 41% of millennials cited these as their top career incentives. And for some additional context, they cited consistent hours and the ability to build a long-term career at 35 and 30%. So what's all that tell us? I think we can infer several pieces of information from that data. But what strikes me most is this. Millennials are attracted to strong benefit packages, perhaps tuition reimbursement or higher 401k matches, and they don't mind having irregular hours. And while that first attribute seems like that's probably the easiest to tackle, the last one might require us to think more creatively about staffing. And that can be a difficult problem to solve, as we all know. That's why the answers to these challenges certainly require a strategy that's unique to your business needs. But interestingly enough, do you realize that attracting this generation into our workforce, what it's actually going to require? It's going to require us to look beyond traditional hiring practices and staffing models in order to attract the talent we want and need in our organizations.